Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So another Wanpra at Abhayagiri. Very pleasant with the sound of rain pattering above the Buddha statue in the alcove. Temperature's nice, it's warm, we're inside. About as good as it gets. Doing something incredibly wholesome. Coming together for chanting, taking precepts and meditation, listening to a Dhamma talk. We're experiencing the fruits of our good karma, and we're making more good karma that we'll experience in the future. It's apparently very rare to come into contact with the teachings of the Buddha. There's the analogy people have probably heard before about a blind turtle popping up in like a little, I don't know if it's like imagine like a little ring somewhere in the ocean. And a blind turtle, the chances of a blind turtle popping up its head through that ring. I feel like I'm not getting the analogy exactly right, but perhaps you can connect the dots. Very, very rare. And for myself, I don't rest in a state of perpetual gratitude at all times, Still afflicted by various mental states, but from time to time I do remember my good fortune to be here, to be doing this. To have a map and to have directions and guidance. To not be lost. And I remember a point early on in staying at monasteries where it occurred to me, oh, I'm not lost anymore, and I will never be lost because I have directions now. I have very, very clear directions on what to do to avoid suffering, to do something about my own suffering, to someday achieve total freedom from suffering. And I guess that's something that occurs to me from time to time, because earlier in my life I had different ideas on what it was that would lead to happiness, which I'm sure are shared by other people because it's very common in the world, things that we're told, get this, do this, this is what you're missing, this is what's lacking, this is what's going to make you happy. And my own experience with most of those things is they never worked. They didn't lead to happiness. And a lot of times they led to more suffering. And yet my experience with this, with the practice, sila, samadhi, panya, morality, virtue, samadhi, concentration, calming, gathering, panya, wisdom, discernment, insight. This stuff actually works. Actually does lead to peace, a sense of wholeness, well-being, ease. And that's a miracle. To find something that actually works. Actually puts out the fires in the heart. And it is not instantaneous, in my experience. It takes time, and it comes and goes, and sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But in this world where instantaneous fulfillment, one-click buying, and then they'll deliver it to your house faster and faster, whatever it is that you ordered. This is a whole different way of doing things, and if we think that it's going to happen quickly, I mean, may it be so for you. I hope it does happen instantaneously. But my guess is it's not going to. My guess is it's going to take a little while. But as Ajahn V said on one of his visits here, stick with it, it's worth it. What else are you going to do? This idea of patience, khanti, say patience or patient endurance for myself. I mean, obviously they're related, but I tend to separate them in my mind. It's two different feelings or mental states, ways of relating to things. And for myself, this idea of patience is not something that came or comes easily. And it always made me think of waiting for the bus. It's like being in the doctor's office, sitting and being in the waiting room, just waiting. And it's a skill. It's a muscle that some of us are weak in and some of us are strong in, but either way that we all have to work on. It's one of the 10 Bharami. And it leads to less suffering. It's very powerful. And I think this is probably common for a lot of people when they take up the robes or when they start practicing. It's amazing to have this map, these directions, and we hit it really hard from the get-go. There might not be a total balance with effort. We might be gripping the shovel or whatever tool quite tightly, maybe too tightly, and over time find more of a middle way with how we grasp it. But in the beginning, teachings like, may my body not move from this cushion until I realize complete enlightenment. It's good to try. May it work, it might not. It might take a few nights. So this idea of a balance between patience and adhitthana, determination, It's very important. As Ajahn Sona, I've heard him say, you need that which is going to sustain you for the long haul. Sort of the idea of a tournament, what is it? A marathon, not a sprint. And I believe it's the introduction to Food for the Heart, the compendium of Ajahn Chah teachings Ajahn Amaro talks about. It says for Ajahn Chah there were two main things that he taught. They are patience and an emphasis on personal experience. And I've heard teachings around patience from Ajahn Chah around, he described like the early years of monastic life as doing the earthworm practice. Lumpur Pasana talks about this from time to time. Just kind of, nothing's working, you've tried everything, and yet you have enough faith to stick around, so you just put your head down and just kind of just bear with it, an inch forward, bit by bit. And eventually, things get easier, your load gets lighter, you work through stuff. But without this patience, we're not going to last. If we want it too much, if we're unwilling to wait, if we're unwilling to bear with, to stick with, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. But if we are willing to wait, no matter how long it takes, to stick with it, to stick it out, to hang in there. And then the other half of Kanti, the patient endurance, bearing with, tolerating, putting up with. And Ajahn Pasano makes a distinction. He says it's not just gritting your teeth. There's more to it than that. The willingness to be with something, usually something unpleasant. It doesn't take too much to bear with bliss or, something that feels wonderful, but the stuff that's less wonderful, less pleasant. The willingness to be with that. And it does seem that when we are willing to bear with, willing to be with something, it becomes more bearable, less intense. How much of that unpleasant experience is resisting it, being unwilling to be with it? It's an amazing quality. Endurance, bearing with, makes things a lot more bearable. And the Buddha called Kanti the supreme incinerator of defilements. Those are pretty big words. The supreme incinerator of defilements. It's something that's worth checking out, looking into. And it's interesting because maybe I would think wisdom would be the supreme incinerator of defilements, or mindfulness. And for myself, for years, I looked past patience. And someone pointed that out, that it said that about Kanti, about endurance, patient endurance. And I looked closer at it, and It's a big one. And it's not to be sort of poo-pooed or overlooked as sort of, I don't know, a lesser Dhamma. Ajahn Chah placed a huge emphasis on it, and clearly the Buddha did as well. It's easy to look past some of these things and focus on cultivating other qualities or mental states. But for myself, I find that all these different qualities are important. And I think you might find that some work better for you than others. You might be stronger in some areas and weaker in other areas. And the cultivation of certain qualities might bring peace to the heart. And I would say, then keep doing that. Do whatever works. And trust yourself on if it's working, if it's leading to peace or more well-being, then that's the right direction. That's the direction to go. And as long as positive mental states are increasing and negative mental states are decreasing, then you're on the right path and you're moving in the right direction, and you should trust in that. Or at the very least, if you're trying to cultivate positive states and you're trying to lessen negative mental states, then you're still on the right path and you're still going in the right direction. And then the other half of Ajahn Amro's descriptions of Luang Por Chah's teaching, the emphasis on personal experience is also quite interesting. And I think for myself that's a hallmark of the Thai forest tradition as a whole, this emphasis on personal experience. And what it means is finding what works for you, putting the teachings into practice for yourself and finding what works for yourself. And trusting that if you've found that cultivating a certain mental state or focusing on a certain contemplation works, then that's it. That's all it comes down to. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. As opposed to saying there's one particular practice that's right for everybody. I mean, the Buddha said that mindfulness is right all the time, but besides that, there's various teachings in the suttas and there's various teachings that come down to us from our teachers. And some are going to work for you and some aren't. And some people are going to say that some teachings are right and other teachings are wrong, but at the end of the day, you've got to find out what works for you and then trust in that you've tried it and you know for yourself. And if there's still doubt around it, then keep trying it until you're confident that that is what works for you. For example, some people might find loving kindness very, very helpful, especially with anger and fear, anxiety. But for other people, it might lead them to more. They say that one of the dangers of loving kindness is for some it can lead to lust. Too much of an emphasis on the positive. And if that's the case, then you're a great contender for the Asubha practice, focusing on the unpleasant, the unbeautiful aspects of the body, death contemplation, corpse contemplation. And that can be very useful for greed and lust and passion. And yet, for some characters, usually those with anger or depression, the Asubha contemplation on the unbeautiful might lead you to more depression and more anger. And if that's the case, then I'd recommend knocking it off. And yet, the only way to find this stuff out is to pick these things up and to try it and to experiment and to see what the results are. For yourself, knowing for oneself. And fortunately, if you have doubts, we have teachers in our tradition that we can ask. Kalyanamita, good friends. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to put this stuff into practice and to see for yourself. To know for yourself. And for myself, I find this quite empowering, quite liberating. This encouragement to trust ourselves, to try things out for ourselves and to know for ourselves. Can lead to great self-confidence. Trusting in yourself in a good way, believing in yourself in a skillful way, in a wholesome way. Self-reliance, not in a blind way or a foolish way, but in a skillful way. And similar to the Brahma Viharas, metta, loving kindness, goodwill, karuna, compassion, mudita, gladness, sympathetic joy, equanimity, upekkha. In my mind, khanti, patience, goes along very well with adhitthana, determination, and saddha, faith. They seem to interrelate and work very well together for me. And they're also dhammas that I didn't focus on immediately. And adhitthana is interesting to me because it's usually translated as determination. And I think the way I picked it up in the beginning was more of like a fierce determination, which is very useful and can be very skillful, but I found that all the time not so skillful because I think I was holding it in a very fierce way, sort of a clenched fists, eyes narrowed, clenched teeth, kind of hardcore. and for myself ultimately unsustainable way. And I think in time I started thinking about it differently. Different ways of translating adhitthana, determination such as commitment, resolve. And I found that one quite powerful as well. Still find that one quite powerful in allaying doubt. A sense of non-commitment, an unwillingness to commit, either like unwilling to commit to monastic life, unwilling to commit to, bigger things in addition to, okay, in this, let's say in a particular sit, committing to a certain meditation object, so like fence sitting. And it's quite unpleasant, as I'm sure most of you are well aware. The uncommitted mind, the mind that's unwilling to commit, the wavering, it's quite painful, pretty unpleasant. But yet the mind that commits, especially if you're committing to something skillful, is quite pleasant actually. Focuses the mind, strengthens the heart. Whether it's committing to a particular livelihood or direction, or in a particular sit, saying, no, this is what I'm focusing on, that's it, end of discussion, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. And then doing that. It's quite empowering. And it for me, it has a different taste than this sort of fierce determination, which at times is definitely called for, but to sort of have more, it's like you can adjust the controls, the mixing board, the volume knob. You have a bit more levels that you can work with. You can pick up the 2-pound weight or the 50-pound weight. You can pick up the small knife or the butcher knife or the club, whatever's called for. You don't have to pick up the sledgehammer every time. And then satta, faith, is another big one. And I'm sure a lot of people come to Buddhism, come to the Buddhist practice, come to monastic life with a bit of baggage around that, the idea of faith, from whatever religion people grew up with. Myself, though, there was sort of spirituality and openness to New Age ideas and stuff in my house growing up. I never had any sort of religion pushed down my throat or impressed upon me. So in my life, when it came time, when I saw a need for that, it arose quite naturally. And I feel very fortunate for that. I didn't come to Buddhism with a lot of negativity around religion, more just a need for it, a hunger for it. So I don't have a lot of baggage around the idea of faith. But that being said, when I first came to Buddhism, I think a lot of us are attracted to Buddhism precisely because we don't see it as a faith-based religion. There's a place for investigation and for thought and reflection, for thinking for oneself, for questioning. And I think this is very attractive, and rightfully so. And yet, faith is pretty important. Faith in what? Faith in the Buddha. Faith in the Buddha's enlightenment. Faith that the Buddha got enlightened, that there is Nibbana, the unborn, the unconditioned. Faith that the Noble Eightfold Path leads to the realization of Nibbana. Faith in the teachings. Faith in the practice. And something that's wonderful is it doesn't have to be just complete faith, and it's certainly not blind faith, because we've been putting these teachings into practice, these methods that we're told lead to complete liberation. And we see the results for ourselves. We're still here. We're still sitting. We're still in the monastery, so it must on some level be working, or we're just so convinced that nothing else works that we're still willing to give this a go. Nothing wrong with that. But I think it's a combination of we've seen some things for ourselves, so there is a bit of a leap of faith. We've seen it lead to more peace or more well-being. And then on top of that, we're told, both by the Buddha in the suttas, or by the Kuba Ajahns in the books, or by the Kuba Ajahns that come to visit here, that this does in fact lead to complete liberation. So those two things combined are quite effective in leading to faith, trust, confidence, to stick around and keep going, to stick with it. And for myself, probably one of the largest causes of faith has been meeting people who have done this practice and clearly manifest the results. The results are clearly evident in speaking with them and being around them and observing them. It was the whole reason why I ordained in the first place. The first time I ordained was in Thailand. And when I met Ajahn Panyavado, I had never met anybody before who had what I wanted, what I had been looking for, and who seemed to know what was going on. And I never met anybody like that, who seemed to be at peace, who had a sense of well-being, true well-being. And the bottom line was, well, if this is what he did to get that, then that's it. And we have the good fortune to have teachers come through here, Ajahn Sumedho, Ajahn Viradhammo, Ajahn Dun, Lumpur Biak, Lumpur Pasano. So for me, that's a huge instigator of faith. Satisfied customers. That combined with the little bit that I've seen for myself, my own experience of feeling better when I do the practice, seeing that it works, seeing that nothing else works. It's enough to keep me here. And it can get very, very difficult. The world has its own difficulties, the monastic life has its own difficulties, and some are the same and some are different. But what's going to sustain you and what's going to get you through those hard times. I would suggest that some of these qualities might be a start. Might be quite useful. There's a wonderful Dhamma talk where Ajahn V is saying, Ajahn Viradhamma is saying that when you encounter difficulty in doing this, please don't think that there's something wrong. Please don't think that something's going wrong, or that there's something wrong with you, that this is somehow abnormal. This is very comforting, I think. Because I think for most of us, this is going to be the case. It's going to be nice sometimes, it's going to be not so nice other times, and that's just the deal. There was another teacher who was saying once in a Dhamma talk I heard about if you're sick, you get sick and you think, there's something wrong, I'm sick. As opposed to there's something right, I'm sick. Or sick like getting a cold or getting the flu or something. That it's normal. It's normal to get sick. It's dukkha is normal. Difficulty is normal. And for myself, when I frame it that way, it becomes less painful, as opposed to there's something wrong. Just normal. In Thai, that's something that comes up a lot in Thai Dhamma talks by the Kuba Ajahns. Tamada, Dhamma, Tamada, normal. What you're going through is normal, what you're experiencing is normal, this is not abnormal. And therefore it's okay. And that can lessen the suffering. There was once I was staying at a monastery in Thailand and this guy walked by. I don't know what he was doing. He was doing something that I thought was inappropriate. It wasn't obscene, but it was just like, all right, And I mentioned it to the Thai monk next to me. I'm like, look at this guy. Can you believe what he's doing? And he was like, tamada. Normal. You don't have to make a problem out of it. He didn't say that, but that's how he took it. And it's remarkable how much that can be applied to. The different stuff in one's own mind and the different stuff that happens around one. I mean, you can ride that one really, really far, that contemplation. It's too hot, it's too cold. This person did this. My mind's doing that. Tamada. As opposed to something's wrong and then start the air raid siren and start flipping out. No, Maipan Lai. Oh, no, there's another great Thai. Never mind. Maipan Rai. Don't worry about it, don't sweat it. No big deal. It's normal. And then one more skillful quality that I've found useful, going back to the Brahma Viharas, the idea of equanimity, which is not always easy for me, easier for some people than for others. And along with equanimity, another quality that I observed in some of my teachers that I didn't really have going on too strong is the idea of levity, lightness. And speaking very, very generally, my experience living with Thai monks both in Thailand and in the States is that they have that quality, especially monks from the Isan, a lot stronger than Americans tend to have it. Ajahn Sek's a good example of somebody who has that quality of lightness, levity, ease. And it's can be quite useful because it can get really heavy, or we can get really heavy about it, especially in the early days, but all along for some of us, getting really grim and heavy and intense. And it doesn't always help, doesn't always make it easier, doesn't always lead to the cessation of suffering. There's a balance, of course, between seriousness and, I guess, getting too light about things. But it's important to know where one falls on that spectrum. Are you somebody who tends to grimness? Would a little bit of lightness be useful? Or are you on the other side? My thought and my experience with most Westerners, including myself, is, especially Westerners that ordain, bit of lightness, bit of levity. Not taking things so seriously, and this is absolutely speaking as somebody who still needs to take a bit of this medication. But for me, this is, I don't see how one could get through this in the long run without that sense of equanimity, sense of levity, sense of lightness, sense of humor. Sense of not taking things so seriously. It's huge. And though Buddhism, I think, shares with, the major religions overlap in a bunch of places. The idea of forgiveness, loving kindness. But the idea of equanimity is one that I've only seen, and I'm certainly not a religious scholar, but my own experience with the other religions, I didn't see that one so much. And yet in Buddhism, it's huge. Equanimity, letting go. Not getting bent out of shape. Not sweating it. It's not easy, I think, for most of us. And certainly it's not easy for me. But what other choice do we have? This is the stuff that works, so this is the stuff that we need. So we got to try it, put it into practice, cultivate it, figure it out, get it going. Fake it till you make it. So I wish everybody well. In the cultivation of this, on this path. May we all achieve complete freedom from suffering.